wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live, this is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me today here on Point of View. We certainly do welcome your phone calls. And a little bit later this hour, we're going to be talking with Carmen LaBerge about her new book, Speak the Truth, How to Bring God Back into Every Conversation. Second hour, we'll have a chance to hear from Mike Huckabee for a little bit, because he is going to be doing a new television program, and I know you'd like to know about that and also hear some of his comments about some of the issues in the news. But before we get to all of that, I wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about this idea of tax reform. Just yesterday, you have the president who flew to Indianapolis to announce his plan. It isn't that different than one we've talked about in the past, but since this will affect you perhaps even more than some of our conversations, I wanted to go into it in a little bit of detail just before we get Carmen on. And in some respects, when we get into tax reform, it's easy for sometimes our eyes to glaze over, but recognize we're talking about your taxes. We can complain about monuments being taken down, about NFL players taking a knee. We can even express concern about what's happening in South Korea. Those maybe only affect you incidentally. But how the government taxes you, or what it actually requires of you in terms of tax compliance, affects most all of us as listeners. So let me, if I can, just give you a brief overview. We can come back to it later if you'd like. But this is, first of all, an attempt at tax simplification. We'll see how that goes. Matter of fact, I love what the Wall Street Journal said: tax reform if you can keep it. It goes back to that famous phrase where they asked Benjamin Franklin after the Constitutional Convention, "What have you given us, Dr. Franklin?" He said, "A republic if you can keep it." And they used the same kind of phrase, meaning, okay, there's the plan that's put forward, and then after it goes through the sausage making in Congress, we'll see what ends up. But the plan right now is to make it much simpler for you to fill out your taxes. We will go from 7 tax brackets to 3. That would be 12%, 35%, 25%, and 35%. Now, the real benefit for most of you listeners is that the standard deduction will be doubled from $12,000 for an individual and $24,000 for a married couple. So this means that a very significant number of individuals, even listening to this program, will not pay any federal taxes at all. And it means that if you are in the middle class, which I suspect most of our listeners are, you will see some benefit in that alone. Now, there's some other issues as well. Families will benefit from an adjustment to the child tax credit, including a $500 credit for non-child dependents, such as elderly parents. That one sounds a little bit like Ivanka Trump, but we'll go on. We have the alternative minimum tax, which will be repealed, and most importantly, the death tax, known as the estate tax, will be repealed, if indeed this stays. The one that probably will be the most significant in terms of economic growth is that the corporate tax rate will fall from 35% to 20%. And, of course, the president's plan also calls for what we would call the repatriation, and again, repatriating these various foreign profits. These are profits owned by American companies which are overseas, but they have not returned them to the United States, brought them into the United States because they'd have to pay this very high corporate tax rate. By doing this, it could bring as much as $2 trillion into the economy.
And that alone is the reason that the Wall Street Journal has been very positive about this particular plan. They say, quote, "The most important news is that the plan would make U.S. businesses more competitive around the globe. The corporate tax rate would fall to 20% from 35%, which is the highest in the developed world." They said this is not as low as President Trump's floated 15% or Ireland's 12.5%, but it would bring the United States below the industrialized world's average of 22.5%. And they actually, interestingly enough, have a chart here in which they show that the United States is, in terms of corporate rank, 35 among developed countries. So you can see that that would be significant. Now, again, there are some criticisms, so let me talk about those. One, since I've got the Wall Street Journal in my hands, let me talk about that one. They said the biggest disappointment is in individual tax rates. The good news is the blueprint would fold the 7 brackets into 3, 12%, 25%, and 35%, and double the standard deduction to $12,000 for individuals, $24,000 for married couples. But then they go on that says that it has, if you will, some people have called that a surtax on the high earners. And right now you have about 1% of the top taxpayers paying 40% of all the federal tax income. And so in some respects, this plan, even though Donald Trump claims to be a Republican, looks more like a Democratic plan. And as a matter of fact, the Wall Street Journal said this sounds more like talking points from Nancy Pelosi. So they've had some questions about that. Our friends at the National Review have said that one of the biggest concerns is that it has yet to tell us what the child credit is. That's an unspecified amount, and that may be one of the most significant for a lot of the working families out there. And so that's one of those issues as well. One of the other writers at National Review pointed out that really because you increase the actual deduction, but you also increase the percentage, you kind of don't really benefit the people on the lowest level of, say, the middle class. For example, one writer, Robert Verburgi, says, under current law, someone single and childless gets to knock $10,400 off of their income before the bottom rate of 10% applies. Under the Republican plan, they'll knock off $12,000, but also see a rate of 12%. So they ran the numbers and said the benefit for some of those people on the lower level would be a savings of all $5.50. And they said, with tongue in cheek, don't spend it all in one place. Kevin Williamson says that one of the concerns is, again, this idea that we are taking more and more people off the tax rolls. He said Ronald Reagan used to boast of all the low-income Americans his policies took off the tax rolls entirely. He said, I'm not sure that was all to the good. We have a large, active federal government that redistributes a lot of money. Everyone ought to pay a little something in federal income tax if we're going to have a federal income tax. Surely nobody's fair share is really 0%. And everybody likes to sit by the fire. Nobody wants to chop the wood. And one of the things I've said before, which is why I would never run for Congress, because one of my requirements would be that I think everybody should pay something in taxes. I don't care if you're below the poverty line, then you need to actually donate some canned goods to the local shelter or something. I think it is not a good thing when almost half of the American people who can vote and should be allowed to vote do not pay anything in taxes. There's no, if you will, skin in the game. Seems to me that everybody should pay something in taxes, if for no other reason than they feel like they're a shareholder, even if all they do is contribute $1 here, or they give some time there, or they donate a canned good or something to the local homeless shelter. It just seems to me the right way to go. So anyway, that's a brief overview of taxes. We'll get back to that, but we now have an opportunity after our break to talk with Carmen LaBerge, and her book is entitled Speak the Truth, How to Bring God Back into Every Conversation. We'll talk with him and her about that a little bit later with Mike Huckabee. It's going to be a great program. We'll be right back.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
You know, when the U.S. debt officially reached $20 trillion, some listeners ask who owns this debt. In the past, we were assured that the national debt wasn't a big deal since we owe it to ourselves. I never thought that comment was very reassuring then, and it simply isn't true now. The U.S. borrows heavily from foreign countries, especially the Chinese, and this creates the first problem: foreign influence. One former member of Congress put it this way: whoever pays the piper gets to call the tune. Foreign leaders aren't inclined to whistle Yankee Doodle. Another problem is that these countries are not an infinite source of credit. They have their own economies to deal with and will probably want to put their investments closer to home, especially as they look at the current congressional spending spree. Are we approaching a time when America's excessive borrowing makes us a bad credit risk? Sometimes the U.S. looks like some of the citizens who have maxed out their credit cards and have nowhere else to turn. The amount some of these countries hold in American debt is staggering. The U.S. government owes China $1.1 trillion. Saudi Arabia probably has about $700 billion in assets. A number of years ago, they threatened to sell that much off when Barack Obama was president. These countries that have been lending America money may not wish to invest anymore in America and might even decide to withdraw their current investments. In previous commentaries, I've warned about the possibility that these foreign investors may simply decide to cash in their treasury bills and invest them closer to home. If our creditors cut us off, our treasury securities could reach junk bond status. The lesson here is simple. Before you spend the money, you need to know where it's coming from. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kerby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And we welcome back to the program today Carmen LaBerge. She has been with us before. The new book out, Speak the Truth, How to Bring God into Every Conversation. She's a writer, a speaker, and most importantly, the host of the Reconnect with Carmen LaBerge. She also, of course, has written for such places as Christianity Today and the Christian Post. She's the president of the Presbyterian Lay Committee, also the founding chairman of Common Ground Christian Network, a graduate of the University of Florida, as well as Princeton Theological Seminary. And Carmen, welcome back to Point of View.
Hey, Kerby, it's great to be with you.
Let's, if we can, for just a minute, talk about why writing the book. And it seems to me, as you talk about early on, that this is a real divided country, and you give us some explanations for that, that we fell asleep at the wheel, that in some respects we're kind of exiles in our own land, and oftentimes we're even afraid. Talk about that, if you might.
Sure. Well, I wrote the book based on my own experience and observation of what other people around me are articulating. So Christians want to engage the culture. They recognize the need for God's viewpoint to be in the mix of cultural conversations, but for whatever reason, they're sort of standing on the sidelines. And sometimes we're standing on the sidelines because we're genuinely, we're just stunned. We just almost can't believe what's happening around us. Those are the people who I would describe as having, sort of fallen asleep, maybe in the late 1950s, and they've really just woken up to a cultural reality that's like, might be likened to the experience of the Jews on the finding themselves on the side of the river in Babylon. Like, where are we? And so there's a little bit of that. But I think for a lot of people, there's a sense that not only do I feel responsible to engage the conversation, And I want to. I have a desire, but I just don't have the information or the tools that I feel like I need. That's what the book is designed to provide. Really very simple to use tools for entering into those conversations, not just with the truth, but in ways that honor Jesus. Because I don't think that you can just scream and yell at people who don't agree with you.
Well, certainly, and we need to build a relationship and certainly build some bridges. But your first chapter talks about where God belongs. You know, one of the problems, Carmen, is some people are saying, well, you know, I have my Christian convictions, but they don't really belong in the public arena. And we've got a culture right now that tells us that we should really keep our faith private. It's almost a violation of the separation of church and state to bring God into the conversation. So what do you say to those kind of people?
Well, I would gently say you're wrong. So here's the reality. God is sovereign, and all of this is God's. And if I am God's person in this place and in this time, I am here on purpose and for a purpose. And so embracing that and living into that is part of what I want to challenge people to do. I want people to begin seeing themselves as ambassadors of the kingdom of God. So you are an ambassador deployed to a foreign land. That foreign land, and when I say it's foreign to the gospel in many, many ways, and it's operating by small k kingdom principles, not big K kingdom principles. And so you're here as an advocate of a king who is sovereign over everything. And yes, we're going to live under the laws of this land, certainly, but we're going to do so as diplomats from another land. And so diplomacy is important. But that means I'm never giving up my citizenship in the kingdom of heaven, and I am absolutely never in any way compromising what a citizen of the kingdom of heaven would do or should do just because I'm in the midst of the kingdoms of this world.
Talking about this new book, Speak the Truth, and it's just out, How to Bring God Back into Every Conversation, about 170 pages, published by Reconnect. We have information about Carmen and her Reconnect program on our website. We have a link to this book so that you can get it. You can perhaps find it in your local bookstore. We've made it very easy for you to get a copy of that as well. One of the things you talk about early on in your book is your mother and how she was such a profound impact in your life, but you also talk about the who bodies, because that's something else. I think there is a sense in which some people say, well, it's somebody else's responsibility. I'll sit in the stands and I'll cheer. You go it out on the field and fight it out, but I don't really need to get involved in this conversation, this discussion, or this debate. What would you say to them?
Well, we have outsourced a lot of our responsibilities as Christians to others. And so I even think that when we think about missionary service, we think that we have done a good job paying other people to go and reach other people for Jesus Christ. That's actually not what the Great Commission says, and that's not how Jesus intends for his people to relate to other people in the world. Every single one of us is a part of the Great Commission missionary force of Jesus Christ in the world today. And so it doesn't really matter what your role is or what your job is. You are in that role and in that job, a person who is there on behalf of Christ. You are representing Jesus Christ. And so you're not off the hook with me. There's no, hey, somebody else will do it. And part of that is exactly because I was raised by the woman I was raised by. And my mom, she is a can-do. She has a can-do spirit. She actually had a television show for 14 years called Can Do Clinic. And so there's really actually nothing I don't think people can do, right? Because that's just the spirit of the home in which I was raised. But she had this responsibility recitation that ended with, everybody pays the price if nobody does what anybody could do, and somebody must. So in this family, everybody is a somebody. So figure out which of the two of you, this would be addressed to my sister and I, which of the two of you is going to do it, because if nobody does it, everybody is going to wish somebody had. And so there's a little bit of an encouragement in here for every person in the body of Christ to take up the responsibility to be the somebody.
Very good. You know, one of the other aspects that you talk about is being an ambassador. And as a talk show host, you probably have had the same experience I have. Every once in a while, I interview an ambassador, and he or she, when they go to another country, are representing the ideals of America. And sometimes we see some ambassadors go native. In other words, they get so involved in the foreign culture, they forget who they're representing. But you talk about this idea that being an ambassador is incarnational, relational, transformational. Speak to that issue, because today we've had some people go native. In some respects, as it says in Colossians 2:8, they've become captured by the culture. And it seems to me that as good ambassadors, we need to represent the king, but we need to also recognize that we're communicating biblical truths to a non-biblical world.
Oh, I so wish I had included the concept of going native. That is awesome. I will steal that for whatever next version of this book comes out. The same yesterday and today and tomorrow, and I am representing him here and now. And so that ambassadorial calling, that second Corinthians chapter 5 verse 20, that we are here as the ambassadors of Jesus Christ on a ministry of reconciliation. And that our job is to be out there in the world every day, in every place, in every conversation, as an ambassador of that king and that kingdom. So you are exactly right. We embody, or we incarnate who Jesus is to the world around us, and then we do so in a way that's highly relational. Jesus actually came to that which was his own. Now, not everybody responded to that in the same way. And so I don't want people to think that just because we go out there as representatives of Jesus Christ, everybody is going to love us and everybody is going to embrace what we have to say. Jesus himself in the flesh did not have that experience. So we ought to anticipate the same kind of reception from the culture that Jesus got. And that's why in another part of the book, I talk about the reality that, this is really about your own relationship with God before it is about, how other people are relating to him.
We'll take a break, and we come back for a few more minutes while we have Carmen with us. We'll talk about this idea of truth and trying to really address this issue of truth in a post-truth culture that we've talked about here, and then really how to kind of suit up and make a difference, and even how to bring God back into every conversation. And again, we won't have a chance to cover all of the various chapters in this book. We have 10 chapters. We've covered just a few. And then I can see already phone calls. Since we have a limited time with Carmen, we'll take those right after she leaves us. But we will then get some of your comments. And some of you have had some experiences of trying to bring God back into the conversation. And you can tell us some of the stories, either success stories or conflicts or challenges you faced. So if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. Let me encourage you to go to the website today, pointofview.net. There are a couple of resources for you. First of all, you can actually reconnect with Carmen. We have that link, reconnectwithcarmen.com, and we have that information there. There's a place where you can listen to the program, and, of course, where you can also get a copy of the book or even a free chapter. We also have a secondary link in case you wanted to get a Kindle or whatever, and so that's the first issue. Number two, of course, we also, as we had our Truth Team Week last week, still are encouraging those of you that would want to join with us financially. You can click on that button, and that is an opportunity for you to make a donation to this ministry so that you can hear these kinds of programs in the future. Carmen LaBerge with us. Second hour, Mike Huckabee. We'll be back right after this.
Your chance of winning the lottery is 1 in about 200 million. And for those of us who don't play, it's a lot worse, or should I say a lot better. Anyway, the chance you're a partner with Point of View, for every 800 people who listen, 1 invests so we can be here with you. In this age of fake news, 1 in 800 plays a vital part in Point of View's work, bringing the church and the nation credible and important information, real news, news that makes a difference. Be exceptional today. Join Truth Team 360. Visit pointofview.net/team. Choose your level of support and be confident you've invested wisely. Point of View has a 45-year legacy of changed lives and changed communities. Schools, ministries, defenders of life and liberty. You make that possible. Take a couple of minutes right now and join Truth Team 360. Pointofview.net/team, or give by calling 1-800-347-5151. 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Continuing our conversation today with Carmen LaBerge as we talk about the book, Speak the Truth, How to Bring God Back into the Conversation. I'll take most of the phone calls after she has to leave us, but I thought I'd take at least one call from South Carolina because Nancy, it sounds like your daughter's experience is, again, one of the reasons Carmen wrote her book. Tell us a little bit more, if you might.
Absolutely, Kerby, and I'm very excited about getting that book. And Carmen, thank you for writing it. My daughter is a college student, and she's right out there on the front lines. Just this past week, there was a fellow student that came into the class, and she had obviously been crying. And so my daughter just reached out to her just to ask what she could do to help her. And the girl just blurted out that her boyfriend had been shot and killed over the weekend, and she just found out she was pregnant with his child. I mean, it was just like the bomb dropped. And my daughter said she just kind of stood there for a second because it was, I mean, this is just such real heavy stuff, you know. And she said, you know, I just really, really would love to share with you that you can find so much strength and hope in God, and that's what I do. I have a relationship with him through Jesus Christ. And she said that another student spoke up at that moment and said, hey, whoa, wait a minute. You can't be talking about that, you know, here. Not all of us believe that kind of stuff, and there's no place for that here. And she said she was a little bit more flabbergasted with what that person said than what the girl had said, because she said it was so obvious that she was silencing me, you know. And so she said she really, what came to her heart, and I want to praise the Lord for our Awana program, because she had memorized this verse from 1 Peter 3:15, where it says, you know, always be prepared to give the hope for the reason for the hope that we have, but do it with gentleness and respect. And she said, the Holy Spirit just told her, don't stop, but be respectful. And so she said she just looked at the girl that was hurting and said, hey,
Yes.
I'd love to share with you more about Jesus if we get a chance to talk later. And so she said this happened on Monday, and she said all this week that girl has been glued to her side and has been asking her. And she's had some really great conversations with this person. But it was really mind-boggling how quickly she was silenced.
Very good. You know, Nancy's illustration, Carmen Hill talks about both. Number one, that we really need to figure out how, in many cases, with these teachable moments, bringing God into the conversation. And number two, then the hostility that came from some of the people saying, no, you can't bring God into the conversation. So this is why your book really kind of meets both of those needs, doesn't it?
Absolutely. And Nancy, I'm so thankful. I'm so thankful that your daughter received that as a divine appointment. I think that's one of the crucial things that we have to recognize in our everyday, just in everything that we're doing every day. We have to be open and attuned to the fact that God has set divine appointments for us. And she was obviously in exactly the place that God wanted her to be, and was equipped, thanks be to God, equipped to articulate the hope-filled truth. Because here's the reality. That other student who responded in hostility to even the mention of the reality of who God is and that God has a hope-filled plan for life, the hostility of that other student is actually just this glaring evidence of the fact that the secular mindset and the secular world, it has no answer to the questions that young woman was bringing. It doesn't have answers to the questions about murder. It doesn't have answers to the questions about how, as a single mom, she is going to bring a child into this world and where she is going to find the household of God, a family of faith that is going to not only receive her as an adopted child, but her child as well. The secular world, it doesn't have any answers to any of those questions. So the secular answer to the question was going to be, I feel quite confident, something that would not be pro-life, that would not lead to the flourishing of this young woman, and it would not lead to her integration into a community that can actually, be her family. And so those would be my hopes in terms of going forward, and would encourage your daughter to help this young woman get really connected with a body of believers who can bring more resources to bear on this particular issue than maybe your daughter all by herself can do. But I'm so thankful of her willingness to engage and the equipping that obviously she's had throughout her life to prepare her for just such a moment.
Nancy, I appreciate you calling. And again, some of the listeners there in WLPG might be able to connect up with you and connect up with your daughter as well. So thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah. Let me just, before we run out of time here, get into that, because that brings us to the middle chapters of your book, which talk about truth. You know, I mentioned being in a post-truth culture, or we are in a postmodern culture. We have this idea that, well, hey, that's not our truth. Well, everybody has their truth. No, there is one absolute truth, and that's one of the central premises of your book, isn't it?
Well, that is one of the central premises of the book, and here's what I want people to take away from what you just said. In a culture where everybody's allowed to have their own truth, I'm also allowed to present the one that I know to be true. Mm-hmm. And so I don't want people to be afraid of the fact that we live in a post-truth culture. I want people to see that as an opportunity. And so in a post-truth culture, when people, might reject the idea of absolute truth, what they do not reject is the opportunity for every individual to describe their own truth. And so I'm not going to describe what's true for me. I'm going to describe the truth that I know, and I'm going to describe that person who is Jesus Christ. And that is going to be so much more fulfilling and attractive a truth than any other of these lesser truths that are out there in the world. And so I want to encourage people to recognize that in a post-truth culture, there's huge power in story, and there's huge power in your story.
Yes.
So everybody's got a story. Like, I think, Kerby, sometimes people think, you know what, I don't really have a story. Well, that's just because we haven't really thought enough about just how complicated and messy our own lives have been. Because we have been, we have walked through those by faith, or we have struggled through those in some cases and been redeemed. We do have a story. And that's one of the things I want people to get in touch with is, are those own experiences, just like Nancy's daughter is now going to have. She's going to have a powerful testimony about how God used her to reach into the life of another human being and speak a word of peace and hope.
Again, if you would like to know more about Carmen, we have a link to Reconnect with Carmen, as well as the Facebook link, the Twitter link, and a number of other things. And oftentimes you use the words, and I love especially your conclusion, re-entering the conversation, re-engaging the culture, reconnecting the eternal with the everyday. Really what you're talking about is bringing, as you said, God into every conversation, putting, in a sense, our biblical ideas and recognizing that Jesus Christ is Lord over every area of our life. There's not a part that's segmented out, but every part of that we should be addressing from a biblical point of view.
Yeah, exactly. Now you sound like Abraham Kuyper. So I think you're exactly right. I do think what we're talking about is that God is sovereign over every sphere of life, and I really just want people to reconnect with that reality, to begin to recognize that God is not just sovereign at church. God is sovereign at home, and God is sovereign on the playfield, and God is sovereign at school and at work. And I don't cease to be an ambassador of Jesus Christ because I happen to be moving into some other role or responsibility in one of those particular environments. In every single one of those environments, I belong to Christ. In every single one of those environments, I am his representative. And if he is not in the conversation, it's because I am not being faithful to bring him in.
Well, again, I know that you have to head on to do your own talk show in just a minute, but just before we do, we have a link to reconnectwithcarmen.com. There is a place where people can listen to your program. It is a place where you have a lot of other information and, of course, where they can get a sample copy of the book. But talk about what they will find when they go to Reconnect with Carmen.
So if you come to reconnectwithcarmen.com, you'll find just a really wide array of resources. So Nancy would be a person who I would say, hey, there are resources there for your daughter to engage, particularly, let's say, on the Netflix series 13 Reasons Why. We delve deeply into that subject matter. So we take cultural issues of the day, we bring the mind of Christ to bear, and then we produce resources that go deeper than we can go on the air for people to really use in their own personal life and then also in their devotional time.
And again, you got resources on identity and sexuality, human dignity, creation care, justice, technology, media, entertainment, parenting, culture, to mention just a few. So some great resources. And Carmen, I appreciate you giving us some time for the program today. I certainly wish you well on your program. And again, thank you for writing this book. It is, again, published by Regnery Faith. You might be able to find it in your local bookstore, but we've made it very easy for you to order it online. And so thank you for giving us some time today here on Point of View.
Hey, Kerby, thanks so much.
Let's take a break. When we come back, we'll take some more of those phone calls. I'll open up that phone line again, and we'll take the others that are left over from this conversation or the previous one, because, of course, we've been talking about a couple of issues. One of those, of course, is the issue of the tax rates, and I want to come back and get into that in a little bit more detail. As a matter of fact, my Viewpoints commentary today is entitled Borrowed Money, so we'll go in and talk about that. Spend just a little bit more time talking about the tax plan and how that could affect you. And so if you have some comments about that, do you think we are paying too much in taxes and you are ready for a tax cut? Are you concerned about the fact that we have a $20 trillion national debt? And what about tax cuts? And what about borrowing money? All that's fair game. And if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. We'll come back with your calls and my comments right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. America is known for its commitment to religious liberty. People have always fled foreign lands persecuting their faith for a safe place to exercise their religion. That's part of the story of our founding. For the most part, the majority religion practiced here has been Christianity. According to a recent poll by the Public Religion Research Institute, that may be changing. The survey, conducted in all 50 states with more than 101,000 Americans, is called America's Changing Religious Identity. The big takeaway is that the religious landscape is changing in this country, especially in the under 30 crowd. There are Muslim, Hindu, and Buddhist populations that are on the rise, while the Christian community, both Catholic and Protestant, appear to be shifting downward. It's an interesting study and worth our attention. It reminds us that the promise of the First Amendment is a promise that Americans would be free to exercise their religion, not the religion of the state. It also reminds us that religious liberty is a promise for all religions in this country. I think that promise is a good thing. It allows for a robust debate, the opportunity to debate finer theological points, and to settle our disagreements over eternal matters peacefully and respectfully. The bottom line is this: America's religious landscape may change, but our commitment to religious liberty cannot. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
Students and teachers are being told that prayer, Bibles, and religion are illegal in public school, but that's not true. Learn the facts. Read your free Religious Liberty Protection Kit for students and teachers at firstliberty.org right now. Don't let anyone steal your freedom with bad information. Get your Religious Liberty Protection Kit for students and teachers at firstliberty.org. That's firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
We appreciate the conversation with Carmen LaBerge, and if you would like to join us now, 1-800-351-1212. One of the things I started out talking about was the tax plan and the emphasis now on tax reform. Yesterday, the president flew to Indianapolis to deliver an address about the tax reform plan. Of course, now we have had a chance to look at some of the various specifics involved with that. And if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. You heard me also mention that I think every American should pay something in taxes. Obviously, everybody still, of course, pays payroll tax, or they pay sales tax or gas tax and things like that. But it just seems to me that everybody should be a participant in one way or another. So let me go to South Carolina, WLPG, and I think Dan wants to address that issue. So, Dan, you have the floor. What would you like to say?
Yeah, Kirby, how you doing today?
I'm good. What would you like to say?
Well, I agree with you 100%. Everybody needs to pay something, and too many people are sitting back drawing Medicaid, and they're able to do something. A lot of people aren't able to do anything, but there's a lot of people that are able to do something. And I believe they need to participate in some way, whether it's in a soup line or whatever they need to do, whatever the government needs them to do to be able to draw the money that they're drawing through Medicaid.
Yeah, and again, when Ronald Reagan first said that, I hadn't really thought about it, but by the time George W. Bush, in particular, and that's going back almost 20 years now, but 15 plus years, said, well, we have fewer people paying taxes. I said, I don't think that's a good thing, because you start looking at countries where they don't have to pay taxes, like the oil-rich countries. Look at Dubai. Look at Saudi Arabia. You don't have any skin in the game. And it seems to me that everybody should contribute something to America. And I recognize that if you're on welfare, you're on food stamps, you don't have a lot. But you know what? You can probably do something. And even if, as I said, it's just donating a can to the food bank, or maybe it's just spending 1 hour at a nursing home or something. We see other countries where they require everybody to have some kind of service. If you don't serve in the military, you serve somewhere else. I just think we have too many people in the wagon, too few people pulling the wagon. And if everybody's pulling the wagon, recognizing that still they're not pulling a lot of their weight because they're in poverty, I got it. And again, I'm never going to run for office, because this is probably one of the most controversial things I say, but I just think there just makes sense in having everybody as an American participate in one way or another. And I don't think that's requiring too much. But I appreciate the fact that you didn't think that was a bad idea.
No, I believe it's a good idea, and the The problem is getting it started somehow. But anyway, just like listening to you. Try to do it every day.
You keep listening, and you call in again. I'm going to get some more phone calls in a minute, but let me just finish the point here, because a lot of people are saying, okay, if we're going to have tax cuts, we really need to do something else, and that is spending cuts. Because let's face it, we had, and this, where's this number? I got to dig this one out because this is amazing. We are just about coming to the end. I guess essentially by the end of this week, we will come to the end of the fiscal year. The fiscal year runs a little differently in the federal government than elsewhere. And this means that we have, as the federal government, collected a record number of taxes. $2.966 trillion already in taxes. Now there's some more coming in because the total revenues would be about $3.21 trillion. But even though we've collected a record number of taxes, you got that in your head? We still are running a deficit of $673 billion. And that's the problem. We still spend more than we take in. So whether we have tax cuts or not, we've got to figure out some way to begin to balance the budget. Now, there's a famous economist by the name of Herb Stein who once observed, and I love this, if something cannot go on forever, it will stop. Well, of course, he's having fun because it's intuitively obvious, but that's where people said, you know, one of these days, the federal government's going to stop. We have liabilities that are huge. We have $20 trillion of national debt. Almost half of that has been accumulated under President Barack Obama and first a Democratic Congress and then a Republican Congress. The rest of it accumulated from George Washington up to the end of George W. Bush's administration. So first of all, you say, you mean what, it was like $10 trillion after Bush, and it's now $20 trillion under now Trump. This is looking like it's increasing exponentially, almost. So that's the first issue. But if you look at unpaid political promises, we're at $120 trillion. Somewhere along the line, this is just going to explode. So this is why we've got to not only talk about tax cuts, but spending cuts. Now, that's always difficult to do, but one of the things that has been proposed in the past is what is called the penny plan. That is, or actually Mike Enzi referred to it as the 1% Spending Reduction Act. And this is kind of intriguing because what it says is that in the next fiscal year, every federal budget would have to reduce its spending by 1%. That's all, just 1%. And then the next year, another 1%. The next year, another 1%. And after 5 years, we'll balance the budget, which I think helps you understand two things. Number one, the federal budget grows by itself, because when you hear about these so-called tax cuts, they really aren't cuts. They're cuts in most cases on the automatic increase. So if we were to just simply say to the federal government, you need to do what we have to do at home when we have financial downturns. You've had those. I've had those too, where I say, honey, we're going to have to cut our budget by 10%. I don't think I've ever said we have to cut it by 1% because we can probably do that without even thinking about it. But here, just all we're saying for the federal government, just cut your budget for next year by 1%. Just take 1 penny out of every dollar. And if you can do that for 5 years, we'll have a balanced budget. And that's all we need in order to balance the budget. Now, it may even take less time because some of the things I mentioned just a minute ago, like, for example, the repatriation of $2 trillion or the reduction of the corporate tax rate from 35% to 20%, will grow the economy so fast we'll grow out of the deficit. But nevertheless, those are just a couple of ideas. We'll continue those in the second hour. But let me take at least one more phone call on this and give some of you a chance to join our conversation. Edward, thank you for calling today. What would you like to add to our conversation?
Yes, thank you. That's a good point of view. Just listen to your comments. I have to make that quote down about anything that can't go forever will eventually stop. I have to write that down. Calling reference, I've always heard this from the time I was working in corporate America to even now in the military. I heard people say, if I get a raise, I don't want to get a raise because I'm going to pay more taxes. To me, that's kind of oxymoronic. I mean, yes, you're going to pay more taxes, but you're also making more money. I think a lot of people basically just don't really capture that. There's such an anathema to paying taxes. everybody should pay some taxes.
I think so. Yeah. And again, I recognize we got a progressive income tax. So part of it, what they're saying is that I'll be in another tax bracket. So instead of being paying 27%, I'll pay, say, 39% or whatever that percentage might be. So I understand that, but you are making more money. That is true. But there comes a point, especially when we have these really high marginal tax rates of 90%, which President John F. Kennedy reduced. There came a point in time where it said there really wasn't any value in working any harder because that extra work, you receive so little return on your benefit that it wasn't worthwhile. But we aren't at that level. But I think your point's well taken and a good example of really trying to think through some of that. By the way, that quote comes from Herb Stein. He's an economist, and he was just actually saying something sort of intuitively obvious, but sometimes you have to say some things that are intuitively obvious to economists, and that is, he said, if something cannot go on forever, it will stop. Duh, of course that is the case. But somehow we have politicians that think we can continue to spend more money than we're bringing in, and we'll never have to pay the piper. I think we will. That's my commentary. We'll talk about that in the second hour, and if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. We'll be back right after this.
Chuck Bentley of Crown Financial Ministries believes you hold the key to powerful and lasting change. You can be a hero.
Are you happy with what you're seeing in our culture? Are you really pleased with the direction of this country? If you're not, then do your duty. Give. Make an investment. Put your money where your heart's desire is to make a difference.
You don't need a colorful cape and costume to be a hero. All you need is to get off the bench and into the game, and to support the fight for faith, family, and freedom. Join the team. Join Truth Team 360 with Point of View Radio. We need heroes to step up this week, today, and do what you can. Visit pointofview.net/team and choose your level of support. Be an important part of Point of View's 45-year legacy of changed lives and changed communities.
It will be a gift that pays off for eternity.
Pointofview.net/team or give by calling 1-800-347-5151. 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Second hour today, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Later this hour, we're going to have Mike Huckabee with us. He has a new television program coming out. I wanted you to know about that. Got a feeling he's going to have a few things to say about the NFL, players taking the knee. Of course, even tonight, Green Bay Packers. We'll see where that one comes about. So there's a lot that we'll be talking about with him. But since in the first hour we talked a little bit about tax reform, I wanted to get back to that real quickly and take your phone calls. 1-800-351-1212. One of those has to do with the fact that even though there is an attempt to actually implement tax reform, there is an attempt to simplify it from 7 tax brackets to 3, 12%, 25%, and 35%. And when you increase the standard deduction to $12,000 for an individual, $24,000 for a married couple, you know how that will be helpful to the middle class. But the same amount of taxes supposedly will be collected because they want to make it somehow revenue neutral. I'm not sure they will, but nevertheless, let's just to start with that assumption, then somebody's got to pay for it, right? Because if you expect the same amount of income coming in, then what you're simply doing is shifting the tax burden where? Donald Trump may call himself a Republican, but he's more like a Democrat. You know, you used to hear people saying, well, Barack Obama calls himself a Democrat, but he's more like a socialist. Well, we'll leave that for another day. But there are now some people, especially looking at this, saying Donald Trump may call himself a Republican. He's been a Democrat most of his life, and in a number of cases where especially they're shifting even more of the tax burden onto the few wealthy people. That's the way, in a sense, quote, you pay for the middle-class tax cut. That's not the only way, because, of course, you have some things that will dramatically stimulate the economy if implemented. One is to reduce the corporate tax rate from 35% to 20%. Repatriation of the foreign profits could be another $2 trillion. But it brings me back to a point I made just a minute ago. The top 1% almost pay 40%. Actually, it turns out to be 38%. And so the top 5% pay 58%. And to help you understand that, let me use an analogy. I love to use these analogies, and I hope this makes some sense. Let's suppose that you have a banquet for 100 people, and you decide that we're going to have the wealthiest people in the banquet pay the greatest amount. And so if I use the current tax breakdown, let's assume we have 100 people in the banquet. One person will pay for 38 people, okay? 4 people will pay for 20 more people, and then 5 will pay for 11 more people, 15 pay for 17 more people, 25 will pay the rest, which is very little, and the other 50 will eat for free. So first of all, you can see that half of the people at the banquet don't pay anything, because essentially when you look at the federal income tax, half of the people do not pay income taxes. That may be a surprise to you. But again, figure out how you're going to work this out, because you have to start thinking about how those individuals are going to pay for it, because you would have, again, if you wanted to figure out what the cost would be, one person pays $380. You have then those next 4 people pay $50 apiece for $200. Then the next group that actually pay, there would be paid $110 $170 down to $110, and then back to free. So you can see that it is really the very, very wealthy. The top 1% pay 38% of the taxes. The top 5% pay 58% of the taxes. And then the middle class pays the middle, and then the rest pay nothing at all. So what you're going to be doing with this particular plan is maybe even putting more of the onus on those who are wealthy. Now, if you're not familiar, there's a group called Patriotic Millionaires. And these are, you would know some of the names. These would be Bill Gates and Warren Buffett and some of these others. A lot of people you might not know. And they've been saying, you know, if we really make as much money as we make, we should pay more in taxes. Of course, what I want to say to Warren Buffett and Bill Gates is, well, then just pay more. I mean, you don't have to be required by the government to pay more. Just pay more in taxes if you want. But nevertheless, this is what they've been arguing for. So in light of this plan, you would think that they would be really excited. Wrong. I got an email from them today saying that they're upset that it would actually eliminate the estate tax, the so-called death tax. I've always had a phrase, you know, no taxation without respiration. Shouldn't be taxed when you're dead. But nevertheless, that is something that they are complaining about. And, of course, you've got enough here for everybody to complain about before it's all through. We'll see whether we get any of that. And it gets us back to this whole issue of tax reform if you can keep it. That was the editorial from the Wall Street Journal. And it simply recognizes that as much as some of us would like to have a flat tax or a fair tax, the problem is that members of Congress, working with lobbyists and working with major donors, like to carve out certain exceptions, deductions, exclusions, so that individuals can actually benefit from the tax code. And, of course, one of the big complaints right now coming from the states is that no longer would your state and local taxes be deductible. Well, of course, that might be a real benefit because then it would remind people, indeed, how much they pay in state and local taxes. And, of course, it would benefit individuals that live in states like Texas or Florida or the state of Washington that pay, or Nevada, that pay no state income taxes. So you can see that there are consequences every step along the way. But again, I'd love to get your comments. Are you excited about the possibility of lowering your taxes? What about the standard deduction, which I think would benefit most families listening to this program today, where instead your standard deduction would be doubled to $12,000, and individuals certainly would benefit in that regard. And for a married couple, that standard deduction would be $24,000. And so certainly this would be a great benefit for married couples. As we know more about the child credit and some other things, this would be a benefit for families. And again, if you wanted a pro-family, sort of pro-growth tax plan, this one has some elements that fit into that category. But at the same time, you have some that are against the idea of removing the estate tax, some that are against the idea of removing the standard deductions that are for maybe state and local taxes, and others that are still convinced that we need to make the wealthy pay even more, even though, as I point out, the top 1% pay, as again, 38%, the top 5% pay 58% of the taxes. The top 10% pay 69% of the taxes. What are your thoughts? 1-800-351-1212. We'll take some calls. A little bit later, we're going to be talking with Mike Huckabee about the new TV show, Huckabee. A great title there, by the way, in which we'll talk about maybe some of the other issues in the news. But if you'd like to join us, as today we've talked about taxes, and when I come back, I'll talk about my commentary on the borrowing that we've needed to do in order to keep the federal government afloat. We'll take your phone calls at 1-800-351-1212. We'll be back with your calls right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
You know, when the U.S. debt officially reached $20 trillion, some listeners ask who owns this debt. In the past, we were assured that the national debt wasn't a big deal since we owe it to ourselves. I never thought that comment was very reassuring then, and it simply isn't true now. The U.S. borrows heavily from foreign countries, especially the Chinese, and this creates the first problem: foreign influence. One former member of Congress put it this way: whoever pays the piper gets to call the tune. Foreign leaders aren't inclined to whistle Yankee Doodle. Another problem is that these countries are not an infinite source of credit. They have their own economies to deal with and will probably want to put their investments closer to home, especially as they look at the current congressional spending spree. Are we approaching a time when America's excessive borrowing makes us a bad credit risk? Sometimes the U.S. looks like some of the citizens who have maxed out their credit cards and have nowhere else to turn. The amount some of these countries hold in American debt is staggering. The U.S. government owes China $1.1 trillion. Saudi Arabia probably has about $700 billion in assets. A number of years ago, they threatened to sell that much off when Barack Obama was president. These countries that have been lending America money may not wish to invest any more in America and might even decide to withdraw their current investments. In previous commentaries, I've warned about the possibility that these foreign investors may simply decide to cash in their treasury bills and invest them closer to home. If our creditors cut us off, our treasury securities could reach junk bond status. The lesson here is simple. Before you spend the money, you need to know where it's coming from. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kerby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. You know, one aspect of this is the fact that we are borrowing our finances. My commentary today, which just so happens to land on the day when we're talking about this whole issue of tax reform, reminds us that when we talked last week about the U.S. debt officially reaching $20 trillion, some of you were asking, well, who do we owe the money to? And the old argument used to be, well, we owe it to ourselves because the Americans were buying T-bills. But that, first of all, wasn't that reassuring back then. It's even less reassuring now because it's not true, because we borrow heavily from foreign countries, especially the Chinese. And this creates a couple of problems. Number one, foreign influence. You know, one member of Congress said, whoever pays the piper gets to call the tune. And he said foreign leaders aren't exactly inclined to whistle Yankee Doodle. So first of all, it's the concerns that we've raised here before. Why can't we get China to help us with North Korea? Because China isn't necessarily always on our side, and they maybe are keeping us propped up because we are, of course, buying their goods, but they're not necessarily our friends, and so that influence is a concern. Another one, of course, is that these countries are not an infinite source of credit as well, and that is that they want to probably invest in their own economies. And so, again, you see both of those aspects with the two foreign countries where we have some of the greatest debt. China, we owe $1.1 trillion to China in various investments, and we see that they may want to start investing more and more in some of their infrastructure and, of course, foreign influence. Saudi Arabia is a good example. We've learned about this over the years that, as a matter of fact, when Barack Obama was in office, President Obama, there was a threat at that time that they were saying, we'll sell off our $700 billion in assets if you don't do what we've done. So you could see that that's another area of foreign influence. And, of course, again, they may want to eventually invest back into their own country. So being in debt is not a good idea, if for no other reason than the fact is we've learned over the years that the borrower is a slave to the debt holder and to the lender. So it seems to me that we should pay attention to that, and that's one of the reasons I wrote my commentary today, and you can find it on our website, pointofview.net. Let's go to the state of Texas, KGNC. John, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Oh, hi there. Yeah, hi. I'm on the road, and I just turned on the radio. I just caught your program, and you were asking for some of the commentary on what the president's trying to do presently with our tax code. And I was telling the young man here a moment ago that just briefly, and I know your time is limited, I lost my business in a divorce. But when you're in business, most people, that typically do not understand what it means to be in business, the burdens that you have, not to mention the tax burden. And I know this, the taxes that my company paid was just, I can't even begin to tell you the burden that it was to maintain that and run your business, alongside that. The amount of taxes that we paid was formidable. And the thing that I would tell folks is this: when a company has an opportunity to have this little sigh of relief, is what the president is giving these corporate tax corporations, you can reinvest that money in your company, which means you can get new equipment, you can hire employees, and you can continue to build on your company and have it grow. When you're taxed at the rate that we are, you are not competitive. You cannot reinvest in your company. And consequently, any company out there is always at risk of dying on the vine because they can't keep up with this. And you're constantly being undercut by the competition.
Well, and again, you could add to that, like you said, all the regulations. And even another one they're proposing is that when you expense it, you could expense it that year rather than run it over many years, especially if you're buying computers or software. Sometimes you're still deducting it at a time when you don't even have that computer anymore. You don't even have that software anymore. Wouldn't you agree?
Exactly. You're talking about depreciating your assets over time.
Right.
And yes, by the time the asset is completely depreciated, it's antiquated equipment that is worthless anyway.
Yeah.
And you add to this is this, and this is just my personal opinion. We all pay taxes no matter what, and it's the one certain thing that we're going to do in this life. But when it comes to this nation, I really feel that we've gotten to a point where we potentially can implode, our economy can implode if we don't get our heads wrapped around this now. We are going to have to sacrifice and tighten our belts, which means, some of us are going to have to pay higher taxes. Some of us will get a break only probably because we've been paying high taxes all along. But the fact remains, we need to drive that debt down, we need to tighten our belts, and we need to give this president all the support that we can so that he can accomplish these things. It's just critical.
Well, John, I appreciate you calling in. I hope you'll listen to the program again if you're able to do so. So thank you for calling in and sharing a little bit from your own experience.
Thanks for taking my call. Have a great day.
He's talking about debt. Let me come to that one more time. I sort of alluded to that in terms of borrowed money, but I've used one other illustration, and it seems to connect with people. Imagine somebody that says, okay, I bring in $32,000 a year, but I spend $36,000 a year. And so you talk to them and you're saying, okay, you're going into debt about $4,000 a year. Yeah, that's right. So what are you going to do? Well, I've got about $200,000 of credit card debt, and I'm going to go to the bank and see if they will actually raise my credit card limit. And you go, what? I've just described the federal government. I just removed the zeros. The federal government this year will probably bring in about $3.2 trillion and actually spend $3.6 trillion. And so the federal deficit at the end of the year will probably be about $443 billion. And we have a total debt of $20 trillion. So I just removed a few zeros to put it into a circumstance that you can understand. If you knew somebody that was bringing in $32,000 a year but spending $36,000 a year and had $200,000 in credit card debt, you would say you are in really bad situation. You have created it, and the answer to that is not raising the credit card limit. Of course, that's what we just did, right? We raised the debt limit. And so this is how the federal government deals with it. Now, I recognize there's a difference between your family finances and the federal budget. But, you know, it's back to my quote that I gave you just a few minutes ago, that eventually, if something cannot go on forever, it will stop. And the stop could be we'll stop being able to have enough money to pay out all of the outlays necessary for things like Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, various kinds of investments, as well as, of course, defense and homeland security and all of the rest. And so each year we go further and further in debt. And as John just reminded us here, we can only continue that for so long. Cutting taxes is going to help business. So one way to begin to get closer to a balanced budget is to have a growing economy at 3%, which it is right now, or 4%, which it might be in the future. The other is to talk about things like I mentioned just a minute ago, like the penny plan. Take 1% off of the budget this coming year. Is it possible the federal government could live within 99% of its budget next year? And then the next year, take off another 1%. And if you could just do that for 5 years, you'll balance the budget. Of course, with the growth in the economy that is possible, might do it in 3 years. But that's showing the desire to balance a budget. And right now, we don't have the occupant in the Oval Office and many members in Congress that seem that concerned about the federal deficit. I am, but they don't seem to be. So that's just another issue that needs to be on the table as we have this ongoing debate and discussion about tax reform. When we come back, Mike Huckabee is going to join us. Again, one of the foremost Christian and political voices in America, an individual that served as the 44th governor of the state of Arkansas, also a presidential candidate. Got a new television program coming out, and I wanted you to know about that, and also wanted to hear maybe some of his thoughts about the NFL taking a knee, taking down some statues, and anything else that happens to be on his mind. He probably has some comments about tax reform as well. So we'll take a break, and before we do so, let me encourage you to go to our website, pointofview.net, and if you haven't supported this ministry, please take the time maybe just to click on that button that says Donate Now. Even a one-time gift would be a great encouragement to us, and we would greatly appreciate your financial investment for us. Let's take a break. When we come back, we'll have a chance to talk with Mike Huckabee, and I'll open up the phone so you can ask him some questions too. All that coming up right after this.
Can you name the longest-running talk show in television history? Can you? It was Larry King Live, which ran for 25 years. That's a good run made possible by millions of dollars in advertising money. But did you know that this year, Point of View celebrates 45 years on the air? 45 years made possible by people like you. No program lasts that long without making a difference, and we realize the many stories we know are just the proverbial tip of the iceberg of what God has done and is doing through your giving. You make every bit of that possible. Stop what you're doing for a couple of minutes, make the call, or click on in and be the one listener out of 800 who invests in changing lives. Join the team. Do it monthly. Not investing takes no effort. Be exceptional. Be the one. Call 1-800-347-5151 or visit pointofview.net/team. 1-800-347-5151 and pointofview.net/team. Be the one. Point of View will continue after this.
listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
This should be a lot of fun. Last half hour here, we have a chance to talk with former Governor Mike Huckabee, who served, of course, as the 44th governor of the state of Arkansas, one of the longest serving in that office. Of course, also ran on the Republican nomination for president in 2008. From there, went on to host Huckabee on the Fox News channel. And, of course, you may also remember his syndicated radio show, The Huckabee Report. And, of course, he is the author of all sorts of books, God, Guns, Grits, and Gravy, as well as Do the Right Thing. And now on October 7th will be the premiere of the new program Huckabee on TBN. And so, Governor Mike Huckabee, thank you for being with us today here on Point of View.
Thank you, Kerby. Great to talk with you again. It's been a while, so it's good to visit.
And I remember you used to listen to this program when you were a student at Southwestern Baptist Seminary, so it just feels like we've known you for a long period of time, even longer than some of the listeners. But
do we want to tell everybody how long ago that was, Kerby?
No, I don't think you do either.
Let's not. Let's just say it was a long time ago.
It was a few years, yes, for sure. Tell us about the program. Again, I think it's going to be lots of fun. You are kind of a stand-up comedian as well as political commentator and musician. And so what are we going to expect when we tune in October 7th?
Well, Kerby, I think it's going to be a show that will inform people of the issues of the day. We'll have a lot of newsmakers. In fact, the very first guest we will have on the show is President Trump. So that's kind of a nice way to kick it off and say, hey, we're serious. We're going to talk about big issues with people who help make those issues. But we're also going to have a show that is wholesome. It's going to be fun. We'll have comedy, we'll have music. It'll be a variety, the kind of shows that many of us grew up with and said, boy, I just wish there was something that would lower my blood pressure rather than raise my blood pressure. We'll talk about issues and topics, but we're going to do it differently in that I'm not interested in doing what I call the political ping pong approach, which is getting someone on the left, someone on the right, and they just argue with each other and they talk over each other and they give us their very predictable talking points. We're going to have people that actually carry on a conversation, and I want to find out. Don't tell me what your side stands for. Tell me why. Tell me how this helps that average family out there in America more than the other ideas that have been presented. And to let people finish their sentences. And I'm going to treat every guest like an honored guest. That's the way I was raised. And I'm going to ask that my guest behave like guest. If you come to my home, you don't put muddy feet up on my table. And if you come to my talk show, you don't bring, a nasty mouth or, a tongue filled with vile and insult the audience. So I think it's going to be a show that people will say, boy, I wish we had something like this for a long time. And I say it this way. We're going to inform them. We're going to hopefully inspire them, and we're going to entertain them. And the inspiration will come in the form of features that we'll have, such as Huck's Heroes, which will be to take a look at people that never going to make the front page, probably are, just ordinary folks, but they've done extraordinary things in their communities and within the realm of serving others. And just to remind us all that there's some really great people out there living in our neighborhoods.
Let me just encourage all of you as listeners to do what we say so often, and that is to go to the website. We have a link there, and we have his trailer, which is about a minute and a half long. So I want you to do two things. Number one, I want you to watch the trailer. That'll give you a really good idea of what's going to happen October 7th and every Saturday after that, 7 Central, 8 o'clock Eastern. And second of all, after you watch the trailer, which is about a minute and a half long, click that arrow button, that share button, and put it on your Facebook page or send it to someone, maybe a Twitter feed or whatever it might be, and educate some people, because I really want to see if we can get a good audience a week from this Saturday, and that will be the premiere in which you'll have a chance to not only hear Mike Huckabee, but as you heard just a minute ago, the President of the United States. So it's a great program on TBN. You should be able to find it very easily, and of course you'll recognize that he'll be playing his bass guitar, and he'll be telling some stories, and you'll be hearing from a number of guests, and I think it's just going to be an exciting time, so I can't wait to watch it.
Well, Kerby, I appreciate it. I do think it's going to be a destination view for a lot of people. I had such a great following on the show that I did for the Fox News Channel. And when people say, well, what's different? It'll be very similar. But let me say to you, one of the things I'm most excited about is TBN has invested an extraordinary amount of resources to build out a phenomenal theater in Nashville, Tennessee, where we're going to do this show, something I've been wanting to do for a long time because I knew that our audience was not Manhattan or Hollywood. Our audience is the heartland of America. Well, this show is going to come from the heartland of America, and it's going to be for those people in the heartland of America for whom there is very little television that is ever targeted for them. This is targeted for folks who, don't think it's crazy if you say to somebody that you meet in the store, hey, I heard your aunt is in the hospital and I'm praying for her.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody thinks you're crazy to say that. In fact, you don't creep anybody out if you just go up and, give a hug to somebody or you say, I missed you in church last Sunday. It's not going to be a preachy show. I want people to understand it'll be TBN's first foray into something that is, by its very nature, not a religious television show, but it will be a show that's hosted by a person that is unapologetically a believer.
Wow. Again, let me, if I can, for just a minute, maybe ask you a question or two, and we'll take some calls.
Sure.
But before you joined us, we talked about the tax reform plan, and this is one in which you would move from 7 tax brackets to 3. Standard deductions doubled, $12,000 for an individual, $24,000 for married couples, reducing the corporate tax rate from 35% to 20%. I know you won't talk about economics on the program all the time, but as an individual that ran for the presidency, you know how important tax reform could be as well.
Well, it's very important. And what this really means is that almost every American is going to get a pay raise. That's what it comes down to. If a person says, well, how does this affect me? Well, if 75% of the people in America take the standard deduction, when you double the standard deduction, that means an increase in the amount of money that 75% of the American people are going to get right off the top. So when people say, well, this isn't going to help the middle class, I heard one of the Democrats, this had no sooner gone out of Donald Trump's mouth yesterday in Indianapolis when they were already at the podium, and you could tell that they were talking about these issues, and they had no clue what even the proposal was. So you have to sort of separate it. But the fact is, middle-class people will benefit immediately by that. But there's another way. When people say, well, the corporate tax, that doesn't affect me. Oh, yeah. In fact, it may affect people even more for this reason. I've tried to say to people for a long time, corporations don't really pay taxes. They collect taxes, and then they add the cost of their taxes into whatever the goods and services are that they produce and sell. So if a corporation, which is the highest in the world, everything they sell you costs more money. And every person they would like to hire, they may not because they can't afford them because of the taxes. When you lower those taxes, it means that the loaf of bread you buy or the gallon of gas that you buy, it means the bed sheets that you buy will end up being less expensive. And it means the people who work there will likely get a pay raise, extra benefits, contributions to their 401k.
Very good. One of the other questions I suspect you'll still be talking about a week from this Saturday is the NFL, and I would be remiss if I didn't ask about some of the thoughts here because this is a multi-layered issue, but even tonight we're wondering what's going to happen in the Green Bay Packers and the fans and all the rest, and you're a football aficionado as well. What are your thoughts about some of the controversy that's unfolded over the last week?
Well, what a tragedy that the NFL has decided it wants to be a political organization and not a sports organization. And I just wonder why they don't follow their own rules. They have specific rules that say that at the national anthem, the players should stand at attention, face the flag, not engage in conversations, put their right hand over their heart, and hold their helmets in their left hand. That's what it says. And they fine people for doing anything that would express an individual approach rather than a team approach. So when you've got Colin Kaepernick who sits down or kneels during the national anthem, well, how come he didn't get fined? When he could wear socks that had pictures of cops as pigs, how did he get away with that? But the Dallas Cowboys couldn't put a symbol on their uniforms to honor the 5 Dallas police officers who were murdered in cold blood. This is what makes no sense to, I think, overwhelming numbers of Americans. And when they watch football, they're not watching it so that somebody can preach to them about their politics.
Yes.
They want to see who wins, who loses, and they'd like to keep a handful of things sacred in this country. And Kerby, let me be fair. I think people who are liberal, way left of me, I think they love America. I think they're patriotic. Historically, people who are on the left or the right all stood and paid respect to the national anthem and the flag. I don't think this is about the left or the right. This is simply something bigger than that. And I don't know why the NFL owners would not just say to their players, if you cannot stand for the national anthem, you cannot take the field.
Let's take a break, and if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. We'll continue our conversation with Mike Huckabee for a few more minutes right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. America is known for its commitment to religious liberty. People have always fled foreign lands persecuting their faith for a safe place to exercise their religion. That's part of the story of our founding. For the most part, the majority religion practiced here has been Christianity. According to a recent poll by the Public Religion Research Institute, that may be changing. The survey, conducted in all 50 states with more than 101,000 Americans, is called America's Changing Religious Identity. The big takeaway is that the religious landscape is changing in this country, especially in the under 30 crowd. There are Muslim, Hindu, and Buddhist populations that are on the rise, while the Christian community, both Catholic and Protestant, appear to be shifting downward. It's an interesting study and worth our attention. It reminds us that the promise of the First Amendment is a promise that Americans would be free to exercise their religion, not the religion of the state. It also reminds us that religious liberty is a promise for all religions in this country. I think that promise is a good thing. It allows for a robust debate, the opportunity to debate finer theological points, and to settle our disagreements over eternal matters peacefully and respectfully. The bottom line is this: America's religious landscape may change, but our commitment to religious liberty cannot. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
Students and teachers are being told that prayer, Bibles, and religion are illegal in public school, but that's not true. Learn the facts. Read your free Religious Liberty Protection Kit for students and teachers at firstliberty.org right now. Don't let anyone steal your freedom with bad information. Get your Religious Liberty Protection Kit for students and teachers at firstliberty.org. That's firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes with Governor Mike Huckabee, and if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. And again, let me just mention, in case you just happen to join us, that we are going to focus a lot of time and attention next week on the fact that the Huckabee Show will begin October 7th, and it'll be on Saturdays, 7 Central, 8 Eastern. And I hope that you'll take the time to watch it. And, Mike, if nothing else, I think this is another way to bring some healing, because we really are kind of the divided states of America, aren't we?
You know, we are, Kerby, but I've just been watching this remarkable series that Ken Burns has done on the Vietnam War, and it really is terrific, and I encourage people to take a look, because it reminds us of a lot of things that I think even I've forgotten from that period of time. But one of the things that has been a takeaway for me is when we talk about how hostile the political environment is and how divided, and we really are. I've never seen the press as hostile as they are. But quite frankly, we were a much more divided nation, and it manifested itself in much more violent ways in the 60s and early 70s than anything we're seeing today. And so sometimes I think I have to step back, take a deep breath, and say, yeah, the press hates Donald Trump, but by golly, you know, he's leading this country in some ways that have been extraordinarily helpful in getting our economy back on board. And you know, sometimes he'll say things that end up giving the press something to talk about for 4 or 5 days because they don't want to say anything good. But I think America, in so many ways, I'm seeing some hope. I think even for me as a believer, I'm not as pessimistic that my religious liberties are going to be trampled on like I was genuinely afraid of during the last 8 years, and should, you know, the other person had won that election.
Very good. Let's give some of you a chance to join our conversation. We are privileged to have with us former Governor Mike Huckabee, and we'll go to Arizona first, KNLB. Georgie, thank you for joining us today. What would you like to add to our conversation?
Well, I'd like to ask a question. My granddaughter told me that she is raising 4 kids, and she got unearned income credit for 4 children. Where did it come from? She says, well, the government. I said, why? She says, on my taxes. I said, well, what did they give it to you for? She says, for having 4 kids.
Well, and again, one of the issues that we certainly have talked about sometimes, Governor Huckabee, is the fact that we would like a tax plan and a tax reform that is sort of pro-family, and I see some of these in terms of child credit and as well as some of the standard deductions, because as you know only so well, we've had sort of a marriage penalty, we've sort of even had a family penalty, and if indeed we think that families and marriages are important, at least our tax code should report that, don't you think?
Absolutely, Kerby, and a couple of things to note. First of all, under the tax proposal that the president trotted out yesterday, there would be a elimination of the marriage penalty. This has been really hurtful to families. I mean, if you get penalized because you're married, guess what? A lot of people will say, well, let's just live together. Let's not get married. It'll be less expensive to us. And it's not only affecting younger people. There are a lot of older Americans who maybe their spouses have died and they're, you know, looking for a new partner. Rather than actually getting married, they just live together because of the tax consequences. We shouldn't have social policy that is driven by people's looking for an economic reason to not carry out good family ideas. The other part is this. If you have child tax credit, what that does, it encourages families to have children and to raise their children and to spend the money on their children. I don't think that's a bad thing. I mean, God forbid that we end up where we don't create the next generation and train them how to be our replacements, because then we're really in trouble.
I'd say so. Let's take some more phone calls. We'll go out to Georgia this time. Diego, thank you for joining us. You're on with Governor Mike Huckabee.
Hi, how are you guys doing?
Very good. What would you like to add to the conversation today?
I'd just like to say really quickly, I work with a fellow Christian, and he brought up the point of Kaepernick kneeling during the anthem, you know, and he was very incensed by it. And I guess he was a little bit, you know, annoyed that I was kind of smiling, and, you know, he said, well, what do you think about it? I said, well, I mean, it's a flag, you know, what does it represent, you know, and he got really, really mad. I said, well, I mean, you can look at a person who blasphemes Christ all day long and, you know, have tolerance for them. But the minute somebody says anything about the flag or disrespects it, you know, it gets pretty aggravated, you know. People just stand up and chest thump. Well, the thing is, you know, we're a nation of laws, but are they godly laws? You know, when I stand up for the flag, am I standing up for abortion? Am I standing up for same-sex marriage? Am I standing up for decriminalization of child prostitution in California? I mean, I think at a certain point we have to go back to Scripture and see what Christ says. He comes to cause division.
Sure. Let me we're a little tight on time. Mike, there's a good example of people saying, okay, how do I live as a Christian in a divided country where oftentimes the laws are completely opposed to God's law? How do we think that issue through?
Well, Kerby, honoring the flag and the national anthem is not an affirmation that America is a perfect country. It's actually an affirmation that it isn't a perfect country. It's an affirmation that we are a people who are ruled by laws, but we're ruled by laws that are made by people, and we can change the people who make them, and we can change the laws they make. We celebrate liberty. We celebrate something very few people on planet Earth ever get to celebrate: freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of assembly. We are free to criticize the government. Every one of the 10 elements of the Bill of Rights, every one of them tell the government what it can't do to me.
Yes.
Not one of them restricts me. Every last one of them tells the government, hands off Mike Huckabee and everybody like him. You can't touch him. You can't go into his house without a warrant. You can't ask him questions unless he consents to answer them. You can't tell him not to believe something or go to a certain church or a synagogue. I mean, we ought to be celebrating this wonderful country, and the 3 minutes that we stand at attention facing the flag, hands over our hearts, is not a statement of saying, I live in a perfect country, but it's that I, an imperfect person, living in an imperfect person, can make it better if I want it to be better by my good citizenship, and that is worth celebrating.
Well, and again, I think that is one of the messages that will come from your program, Huckabee. Again, the premieres on TBN October 7th, 8 o'clock Eastern, 7 o'clock Central, and it will be every Saturday. And the first one, you'll have President Donald Trump. I can't wait to see it. And Mike Huckabee, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Always a pleasure, Kerby. Great to talk to you again.
Again, we have information about that on our website. You can click on the picture there we have of Governor Mike Huckabee. It will take you there. And again, one of the things that we've done is the trailer is about 1.5 minutes long. So let me encourage you to watch that and then to click on that button, that share button. It's a little arrow. And put it somewhere, send it as an email to a friend or put it on your Facebook page and start a conversation about what is the future of America and what Mike Huckabee wants to do on his program. Or maybe you can make it a tweet that you send out through Twitter. We've made it very easy for you to do so. And you can find all of it on our website, pointofview.net. Just before we go, let me mention again that we are dependent upon your financial gifts to bring these programs to you every single day. So if you can click on that button that says donate, or of course, we still have our Truth Team banner up there. We say, be the one, join the team, be one in 800 listeners who give to this ministry, and we would greatly appreciate your financial gift. We've talked about that, and we will do that again even tomorrow, our weekend edition. But before then, let me encourage you to visit the website, pointofview.net. I want to thank Andrew and Steve for their help behind the scenes. We'll see you back here tomorrow for our Friday weekend edition.
Your chance of winning the lottery is 1 in about 200 million. And for those of us who don't play, it's a lot worse. Or should I say a lot better? Anyway, the chance you're a partner with Point of View, for every 800 people who listen, 1 invests so we can be here with you. In this age of fake news, 1 in 800 plays a vital part in Point of View's work, bringing the church and the nation credible and important information, real news, news that makes a difference. Be exceptional today. Join Truth Team 360. Visit pointofview.net/team. Choose your level of support and be confident you've invested wisely. Point of View has a 45-year legacy of changed lives and changed communities. Schools, ministries, defenders of life and liberty. You make that possible. Take a couple of minutes right now and join Truth Team 360. Pointofview.net/team or give by calling 1-800-347-5151. 800-347-5151. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby.